Hello everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today I would like to discuss DS relationships not being perfect. Now this is inspired by a conversation that we had during our last live stream, which is live stream number 35, and we had a great conversation talking about negotiations and contracts and how do you use them and when do you use them and all sorts of different elements related to those two things. And it was so intriguing, and I am planning on redoing my video specifically about contracts in the future. Not quite ready with it yet, but hopefully soon. But I did have another little nugget of a thought I took away from that conversation, and that had to do with being perfect in DS, because what I found from that conversation is many people, especially those who had never done DS relationships before or hadn't done them for long periods of time yet, or were new to BDSM in general, there was this concept that contracts are something that you do at the beginning of the relationship. It's comprehensive and it's binding on all of the parties in the relationship, and it's more or less assumed to last the entire length of the relationship, which is a very interesting idea to me. Now, I want to make it clear, this is not a video about contracts, but just briefly to make sure everybody is aware, you can do contracts in any number of different ways that you want. You can have contracts that are very long and detailed and are binding for all of eternity. You can have ones that are short and sweet and more like a guideline to the relationship. There are a ton of ways that you can personally set up your contract. But again, it goes back to that general concept of what a contract is, which is part of the general thinking of what is a DS relationship like. And this is how it connects in my brain to thoughts about being pressure on being perfect with DS relationships. And that is, you are never going to get everything right the first time. And especially if it's the first time you've engaged in a DS relationship, having a situation where you decide you want to be in a DS relationship with somebody, and day two, you come up with a contract, and you have the rules and the punishments and the protocol, and how to use safe words and boundaries and limits and all sorts of different provisions in it, and it's like this thick. And you don't talk about what do you do when you want something to change, or you don't make provisions in there that allow you any room for failure, and you've just started the relationship. You haven't had any practice at putting all those elements together yet. It's sort of like deciding to put on a very big production orchestra symphony when none of the instruments have ever played together before and none of the musicians have ever met each other before. The conductor can try their damnedest to get everybody to work together and make a beautiful production, but chances are people are going to make mistakes. And it's the same thing with a DS relationship. You can have very good intentions, you can be very, very educated, you can read, you can go to classes together, but until you have that time to actually practice doing the DS elements, maybe first you do rewards, and then you do the punishments, and maybe you talk about some part-time rules, and then you start doing them more. You know, if you don't give yourself that chance to kind of learn what works for you, and you try to put it into a contract, chances are it's not going to work out well. But we never talk about this, and that's why I want to bring this up in this video, is we don't tell people about making mistakes in their DS relationship. It's like it's assumed that by the time you get to a DS relationship, you're going to be so experienced and knowledgeable that you know how to do it, or if you don't know how to handle exactly what you negotiated for at the very beginning, it's not worth doing at all. Not that people overtly say this, but by lack of talking about accommodation for mistakes in DS in terms of structure and in terms of the relationship itself, it's something that's missing from the dialogue. And I think we do an okay job talking about what happens when you make a mistake in a scene, but what happens when you mess up the relationship and you mess up the DS. And it's almost like if you mess up, it's not worth doing, or it must be just like wrong flat out, as opposed to like, hey, maybe there's this one element that needs to change. But when you have something like a contract that's in place from the very beginning that you don't necessarily make explicit terms about renegotiating or discussing, it can make it so much harder to make those changes without feeling like something in the relationship itself is wrong, rather than maybe the way that you're doing the relationship. And so I just want everybody to feel like it's okay to try things out, and to remember that regardless of how many years of experience you have, no matter how many books you have read, no matter how many times you've done this before, we all make mistakes and we are all human. And maybe you have fantasized about this one thing that you really, really want to do in power exchange for your entire life, but maybe that doesn't translate into reality so well. Or maybe it's not something that your partner is super comfortable with. Or maybe it's actually really hard to do with your work schedule. Or maybe, just some mundane everyday thing happens that makes getting to your fantasy very, very difficult. And it's okay to mess up. It's okay to go to your partner and say, hey, this thing that I was really enthusiastic about 2 weeks ago isn't working for me. We made a mistake when we were negotiating. I didn't have the full information about how I would actually feel about this thing before we negotiated. And I think, if anything, if you can take away something from this video, it's that thought right there. The reason why I think we need to make more room for making mistakes in DS is because if it's your first time doing all of these elements together, you do not have the full information when you negotiate about how things are actually going to be able to work out. It's like negotiating for a wax play scene or a bondage scene or any other kind of scene that you've never done before, and agreeing to do a bunch of things that you've never tried, and then crossing your fingers and hoping it works out. And maybe it is a great time. Maybe it does work perfectly. But sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. And it's important to have some kind of skill set or tool that you use with your partner, no matter what side of the slash that you are on, or even if you're a switch to be able to say to your partner, hey, this isn't about you. This isn't even about the relationship. This one element or this thing is not working for me, or the level of rules that we're working with is not working for me, or whatever it happens to be. I think as well, we put a lot of pressure on dominants, even above what we do for submissives, to get everything right the first time. And part of that is because being a dominant is very risky, and they are the ones who, for the majority of the activities that are going to be done in the relationship, are the ones who are going to be more likely to cause harm. So we have a higher standard we set for dominants for being able to do things right. But because they're already the ones in power, we don't often discuss what do we do when the people in power make mistakes. Do you go to your submissive and admit when you punish them wrongly? Do you go to your submissive and admit when maybe the scene that you did, you weren't feeling super energized, and so maybe you weren't fully in your dom headspace? Or maybe you mess up and you forget rules, or it's hard for you to be consistent checking your submissive journal, or it's hard to remember to tell them to drink 8 glasses of water a day. It's okay as a dominant to make mistakes, but we don't tell people it's okay to make mistakes. We tell them and pressure them to get everything right the first time. And I think maybe in some ways I've been guilty of doing this, because I do put pressure on dominants to perform well, because I want people to understand the gravity of what they are doing when they engage in DS, because it's not easy. But you're not going to make a masterpiece your first time holding a paintbrush, unless you're like a complete prodigy, in which case please share that information with me. That's very cool. But you need to have a way to communicate that with your partner, because it's all really about communication. It's all really about understanding the reality of doing DS, which is you can fantasize as much as you want on, meeting the actual perfect dominant at a coffee shop who whisks you off your feet, and the next day you sign over your entire life to them, mind, body, and soul, and then you have 60 to 70 years of complete bliss before you die in each other's arms. But that's not how life usually works, and it's not usually how people work. And so while fantasy can be perfect, it is fantasy, and fantasy is not reality. You shouldn't expect your partner to be perfect either. It's unfair when they haven't had complete information and dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of practice of doing something to expect them to always get it right. Because things are different day to day, and if you're living a 24/7 relationship, jobs change, the weather, the mood, what they had for breakfast, did they eat enough the day before, are they dehydrated, all of that affects one's ability to pursue a lifestyle. If you're a new submissive, remember as well that dominants are not going to be perfect, and you should expect them to be, in the same way that hopefully they would not expect you to be perfect. Remembering rules is obviously the ideal, but we are all operating with brains that are usually filled with information every single day and a million things to think about. And that's why we have provisions in most of our relationships for things like rewards and punishments and discipline, is to acknowledge that sometimes mistakes are made, and hey, we have this really great tool that we can use to make sure more mistakes aren't made, and to talk about them in a way that preserves the DS relationship. And for some people, punishments and discipline and all that is a good primary tool to use when mistakes are made, especially for the submissive, but that does kind of leave the dominant out of the equation, and punishments aren't always the most suited way to talking about making mistakes in a relationship, because sometimes the punishments are the mistake, which is something that's worth acknowledging as well. You know, not everybody is going to have the same system of discipline in their relationship. Maybe you don't use punishments at all. Maybe they're too emotionally hard on you. Maybe you don't use rewards because you don't feel like being rewarded for your submission with something that is monetary or physical is helpful for you feeling like a submissive. But have something. And I'm kind of rambling, so I'm going to try and like wrap this up with some kind of solid thought here and some kind of solid piece of advice for everybody. And I guess I will just end this on: be open to practicing and be open to working things through with your partner, and make sure you take time to acknowledge when is a malicious error or a violation versus an honest mistake or somebody forgetting something, just faults of the human brain. And take time to be kind to your partner and be understanding, be they a dom or a sub, of their individual circumstances and of learning themselves in this DS relationship, because you will learn and you will grow and you will change, and making room for that change is something you have to do in BDSM. You will change so much in the first 5 years of doing BDSM in terms of your preferences and limits and desires and goals, that trying to get it all right the first time is never going to happen. Hopefully you guys got something out of this video. Remember that you get to do BDSM any way that you want, and this is a very individual lifestyle, it's a very personal lifestyle, and you, in the end, have the autonomy and the choices to be able to do what makes you happy. And I encourage you to do that and not feel like you are constraining yourself or putting yourself under pressure or your partner's under pressure to be one way or another. Okay, I'm seriously going to end this video now because I am definitely ranting. Hopefully you guys have learned something from this. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to see more from me, if you want to learn more about DS and BDSM, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week. If you really want to support my channel, best place to it is on Patreon, link to that down below. Great perks, chats, rewards, exclusive videos, photo shoots, all of that great stuff go up on there every single month, so do check that out. If you already support, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me, and I will see y'all again very soon. And until then, have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye bye.